So today I want to talk about the symbolism of vampires. Now before I start, I want to have a brief encapsulation of my current idea of mythology. So mythology is something, and religion is in the same category. It's so deep that it penetrates the mind. It goes beyond the rational mind and it speaks the language of symbols. The way I think about it is that the brain has evolved. First, we were kind of this reptilian brain where we just ate and slept and didn't have too many emotions. And then we kind of grew and expanded. And part of that process was getting the symbolism part of our brain, like the part that speaks in the language of objects and how they interact with the world and how we can interact with them. And then after that came this logical thinking, talking part of the brain, but the symbolism part of the brain is still there. And I believe that that's often the language of dreams, and that's often the language of mythology. I was on a bus one day, and I caught this bus regularly, and there was this adorable girl who got on every day, and she had Down syndrome, and she would walk into this crowded bus with so much confidence, and she would sing Miley Cyrus so loud every single day. She would just serenade the entire bus, and it was great. And then she would talk to strangers about Medusa, and this captured my imagination because I realized that this girl with Down syndrome loved Medusa, and I also knew Ivy League scholars who would write essays on Medusa, and somehow this one myth was passed down through centuries and thousands of years was captivating the minds of every single person, no matter how intelligent they were, no matter what kind of person they were, no matter what their interests were. So there's something in myths that are passed down over and over again that kind of goes past the intellectual mind and it goes past the morals that we can take from it and what they represent. These stories are so profound that they penetrate us into our core. They tell us what it is to be human in a lot of ways. And I think vampires are a similar reflection of that. I think vampires are profound to us, and they resonate with us, and they are retold in all sorts of different forms because they are so profound and we have things to learn from them. And so some ideas popped into my mind the other day, and I figured I would share them with YouTube. So one of the first interesting things that pops into my mind when I think about vampires is the term emotional vampire, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think vampires are just archetypal versions of emotional vampires, realistically. And an archetype, just so you know, is a kind of blown up form. It's the most exaggerated version of things. So in Christianity, Christ is the best version of a man, and the devil is the worst version of a thing. And every religion and myth has, like Zeus is the archetypal version of unbridled sexuality. He can't stop himself, and he goes after everything that has a vagina and moves, essentially. But vampires, I think, are this archetypal version of an emotional vampire, of a parasitic human being. And I have a few reasons that I think of this, and I'll explain them now. The first one is, well, what does a vampire do? What do we know about vampires? The first thing is that they suck blood. I mean, that's what every vampire does, and it reminds me of the sort of emotional vampire type person that sucks the life force out of everyone else. And generally it'll be like they'll create some sort of story in which they are the victim, they were bitten maybe, and they kind of suck you into their drama. And they do it bit by bit, not like a vampire that just kind of comes into your house at night and sucks your blood. They kind of oftentimes ask you for a favor here and there, and then slowly take more and more of your life force until you are sort of sucked dry, or until you become a vampire, unfortunately. The second thing is that vampires stay up at night and don't go out during the day. They can't stand the sunlight. And it's interesting because humanity generally, we think of humans as people who go out in the morning and go to bed at night. And so the vampire is kind of a flipped reversal of normal social behavior. Like vampires are kind of the opposite of normal, the opposite of entrenched in society. And so a lot of these emotional vampire types also might be drug addicts. They might not have proper jobs. They might kind of be on the outskirts of society in a lot of ways, and they kind of refuse to integrate, I think is what that's pointing to. The third thing about vampires is interesting to me. It's that they can't see themselves in the mirror, which means they can't self-reflect, literally self-reflect. They can't see themselves. And I think that's true of a lot of emotional vampires too. Like, they cause all this drama, and when it is put on them to take some responsibility for their actions, they are constantly the victim, and they constantly are not responsible in their own heads for their actions. And the fourth one, which is the most interesting to me, is that vampires have to be invited in your house. And I think that's the most profound takeaway from this video, is that if you have an emotional vampire in your life, you invited them in. And you can also ask them to leave. The myths don't quite tell you about that part. In the myths, you have to drive a stake through their hearts, and I wouldn't recommend that. But you can set boundaries in place, and vampires have to respond to boundaries. So I hope that was helpful. If you're interested, Jonathan Pajot has brilliant works in this sort of vein. And Carl Jung is great, although he's incredibly difficult to read. When I read Carl Jung, it's as if I have learned English as a second language, and I am trying to figure out what the hell is going on. But Marie von Franz is a great intro to Carl Jung, I would say. And of course Jordan Peterson, who I owe a lot to, actually. He's profoundly changed my life and introduced me to this concept of symbolism in art, in literature. Anyway, I've been Serene Desiree, and thank you very much for your time.